Hello and welcome back to another episode of Myths and Apps podcast series where clinical clarity meets expert insights. And today we are focusing on a vital area in pediatric neurology, which is early warning signs, developmental regression, and delays. These subtle yet significant changes can be easily missed unless we know what to look out for. And to help us decode these red flags, we have with us Dr. Viveka. With a rich background in pediatric medicine from Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Dr. Viveka has worked hands-on in neuroimaging, lumbar puncture techniques, and early intervention strategies to transform outcomes for these young patients. Welcome, Dr. Viveka, and it is such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm introduction.
So, Doctor, to begin with, could you explain the difference between developmental delay and developmental regression, and why is it so critical to recognize this distinction in pediatric neurology?
Okay. So, see, instead of getting into what you have actually asked for, first I would like to just give a brief introduction of what exactly is development, and then go to what is developmental delay and developmental regression. So, coming to what is development, actually, when you come to pediatrics, it's measured in terms of, it's qualitatively when a doctor assesses, it's in terms of majority in 4 domains, that is the gross motor, fine motor, language and social and language, personal developmental milestones. So there are some certain definitive set of developmental principles, that is, it is a continual process from conception to maturity, as well as the sequence of development, that is, its majority is the same in most of the children, but the rate of development varies from child to child. And development is intimately related to the maturity of the nervous system, along with the generalized mass activity is replaced by specific individual processes, and it takes place in cephalocaudal direction, as well as certain primitive reflexes have to be lost before the corresponding voluntary, that is, the voluntary movements have been acquired. Okay, so it is mainly you're looking at the 4 domains, and it is majoritarily you get like it is many factors hamper or take and help in the process of development. You have antenatal, natal, and postnatal factors. And now coming to your question, that is, what is developmental delay, what is developmental regression, how do you differentiate both, and why is it so important? So in general, to say developmental delay, that is when you compare that particular kid with other kids of same age, if there is discrepancy of around 25% of whatever milestones they had to attain that particular age, or in terms of standard deviations around less than -2 standard deviation, we say terms of developmental delay. And as I said, there are 4 domains of development, mainly what to focus on. If 2 or more are delayed, then we term it as global developmental delay. Okay. And there are other terms known as developmental deviance and developmental association and regression. Coming to the regression. So in developmental regression, mainly it is nothing but where they have attained a certain set of milestones, and following which they have lost whatever attained milestones they have attained previously. So in terms of definition wise, we would say that it is progressive deterioration of attained milestones for more than 3 months, or loss of previously attained intellectual or developmental abilities, or development of abnormal neurological signs. So this is in terms of putting it as what is developmental regression. And when you are putting it as developmental regression, you should be careful, and you have to objectively assess whether it is parental perception, or you can objectively feel that there is regression of attained milestones. So you will have to look at if there are any other associated features of new onset seizures or any other clinical symptoms like increasing hydrocephalus in the first year of age. All this can hamper development. So keeping in view clinical context as well as parental perceptions, you have to come to a conclusion of whether it's developmental delay or developmental regression.
It's perfect, Doctor, and I think that's such a clear and important distinction that you've given us today. So now moving forward, what are some of the earliest neurological red flags that pediatricians or GPs should watch out for in infants and toddlers that may signal developmental regression?
Okay. See, first and foremost, your question is appropriate, but what I would say is developmental regression itself is a red flag sign.
Oh.
Among the red flag signs in general development, when I, as a pediatrician, as well as a pediatric neurologist, when you examine your children, so developmental regression itself is one of the red flag signs. So when you take children of global developmental delay, or when you take general children, well, kids also who come to your OPD practice, and when you're assessing their development, if they have certain features, that is, they are supposed to attain a certain set of milestones by a particular age group. So there is a maximum upper limit to attain those milestones. If they have not yet attained those milestones, even by the upper limit of that particular age, then they come under red flag signs. So similarly, when I mentioned that there are 4 domains of development, individually, if you have to go, in each domain, for each milestone, there's a particular upper limit to attain the milestone. So for example, if you take, the child has to have visual fixation and start following, but around 2 months. At least visual fixation should be there by around 2 months. If the child does not attain this as early as 1 to 2 months, we can even intervene and then you have to come and work up for why this child has not attained. So next, coming to vocalization, that is, children tend to make some monosyllable sounds, babbles, this, that, they have to attain it by around 6 months. If they're not attained by 6 months, then what are we missing out? What is the reason why they're not yet ready? And then sitting without support is by around 10 months. They have to. And then standing with assistant is by 1 year of age. And then hands and knee crawling like bear, that is around by 14 months of age. They should be able to independently stand by around 17 months of age, and walking alone by around 18 months of age, that is 1 year, 6 months. And they should be able to tell single words or single phrases by around 18 months of age, and imaginative play around by around 33 years of age. So these are some of just a few examples. Actually, if you see, to go in depth, every milestone has an upper limit of age. Like all the domains have, it's a wide, huge topic. But just to give an overview of when or what are the red flag signs, this is something which I wanted to put to. Anyways, coming to generalized, see, basically regression itself is a red flag sign to even, I'm just emphasizing more because that's very important. Then any significant family history of neurodevelopmental disorder, then our antenna have to be up when you are examining the children on taking particular history. Any developmental stagnation or any autistic regression, or you have poor eye contact, decreased social interaction after a period of normalcy. That is not something which I meant by autistic regression. And especially when it comes to the general practitioners or the pediatrics, when you should refer them to pediatric neurologists. Whenever in doubt, please do refer. That is first. Second, when you have that is nothing but what I meant by diagnostic dilemma. And second, any features of neurodegeneration or neurometabolic or any delayed attainment of milestones. What happens in the current, means at least down the lane, like previous around 3-4 years back, is the awareness regarding all of this was not much. Currently, the awareness is increasing. So what is happening is, many people, even as practitioners, they tend to push off saying that, okay, your child does not attain speech by 1 year or by 1.5 years. It's okay, they will attain. It's okay, they'll attain by 3 years. It's okay. We also attain late. Something like that, they tend to generalize and put it forward. But it's not always genetic component. So if there is a significant family history in terms of other things, or there is a significant birth history, then they have to be evaluated for the reason for the delay. If everything is okay, if everything is fine, you're not finding any clinically neurological signs, then we can reassure at that point of time that you have to stimulate the child well. You have to initiate therapies, and that's when they will attain the milestones gradually. So, and lastly, one more reason why would you want to refer to a pediatric neurologist in terms of these red flags when you pick is for the pharmacological management and clinical management.
Yes, I think those are definitely signs not only this frontline, but everybody should look out for, even parents should look out for.
Exactly. That's what the parents have to get aware or become aware. That, see, by this certain age, the parent has to. So there are many governments which are taking initiatives in terms of making the TAI card, Aadhar card, or the antenatal card, which contains the antenatal visits to the parents as well as the vaccination, wherein they pictorially depict by what age the child should have attained this, so that even in their local language, people can understand. And if there is a delay or they find that there is a difference, they have to reach out to a doctor for further management.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting, doctor. So now, doctor, in your experience, what are most common neurological or genetic conditions linked to developmental regression?
Okay. There are so many. Okay. To put it first I will start from development delay, because development regression is also, means most of the times there is a development delay followed by regression. Very rarely it is like they're perfectly normal till a particular age and then they end up having regression of milestones. So it is always seen with developmental delay. First, coming to the causes of global development delay, in that I said mainly means you can look at three main domains, wherein when the mother is pregnant, during the pregnancy and at the time of delivery, as well as post-delivery, what are those? So in terms of medical terminology, it's known as prenatal, natal or perinatal and postnatal causes. So in this, you can have multiple causes of like birth-related injuries such as asphyxia, prematurity and any complications following. And when you take prenatal, you can have antenatal any complications as well as other genetic disorders, metabolic disorders, any infection exposures or infectious causes, affecting the mother as well as the fetus, as well as teratogens or toxins. And when you come to the postnatal, you have an environmental component over here. Even in the prenatal, you have an environmental component. So along with that, you have psychosocial environment, neglect, infections, trauma, toxins, and severe malnutrition. And when you take genetic, you have various metabolic disorders, you have various syndromes, you have neurocutaneous syndromes, you have leukodystrophies. And also you can put it at like causes of development delay, you can put them as static causes and progressive causes. Static causes are something which one-time insult and then that is a sequelae of that insult, and whereas progressive it's ongoing. Most of the metabolic disorders are ongoing and they come under progressive. Whether static causes, you have chromosomal abnormalities, you have birth insults, congenital brain malformations, or you have birth trauma, and you have intracranial infections which are one time. The insult has happened one time and sequelae of that. Whereas progressive causes, you have, as I said, metabolic disorders such as amino aciduria, galactosemia, Leishmanian mucopolysaccharidosis, and you have ongoing infection sometimes also can be there, that is in the form of SSPE. And you have disorders that can affect the white matter as well as the gray matter. Not to go too much in detail, but most of the white matter, gray matter disorders, they can be associated with neuroregression. So there are particular age group where you have certain set of disorders which present below 2 years, more than 2 years, 2 to 5. And so based on the specific age of presentation, the clinical presentation, what they present with, whether other systems are involved in the form of organomegaly or eye involvement, heart involvement. Based on all of this, there is a particular set of classifications where you can put them into a particular group of disorders. And most of these disorders end up having neuroregression or development regression. So how would this, I think the second part of the question is, how would this help? Early identification has a big role to play in the form of, if you take previous 20-25 years or around or years or even 5 years down, back the previous lane, it's like you never had treatment for few specific disorders. So as time goes by, there's a lot of research being done everywhere, and we are getting new treatment options, gene therapies, bone marrow transplants for various conditions. So similarly, for such conditions, even antenatal diagnosis has a great role to play. One, you can offer the parents whether they wish to continue the pregnancy or not, give them an informed decision to take. Second, for where the probability of whether it will be lethal or not lethal, and then parents take a decision to continue, then you can offer in vitro gene therapy, and especially for conditions such as SMA, spinomuscular atrophy, wherein the cognition, that is, you find that they're perfectly normal when you converse them, speak to them, all that, but they'll not be able to. Gradually what happens is there is atrophy of the neurons, following which atrophy of the muscle fibers, following which they will have inability to lift their limbs and move and do day-to-day activities, and which will invariably lead to bed-bound condition. In that also you have various classes wherein SMA 0 is very lethal, mostly intranatal deaths, and they usually survive less than 1 month, and then 1, 2, 3 and 4. But you have even the higher, means the lower, the 4 spectrum, wherein they are actually like they are able to sit, even walk a few steps, and they're basically known as walkers. So that's how earlier diagnosis is going to help him. And for example, Krabbe's disease, you have bone marrow transplant, you have adrenoleukodystrophy, where in these also you have bone marrow transplant as well as diet modification. Then you have Wilson's disease, where earlier you pick it up, then you can initiate early copper chelating therapies. And especially in metabolic disorders, you can put them on low protein diet as well as specific diet for those particular disorders. So definitely earlier the diagnosis, the earlier the initiation of treatment, the earlier workup, and the better outcomes and lesser sequelae of or damage that is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable insight, doctor. So now, when a child presents with developmental delays or regression, what does your diagnostic workflow typically look like? From first assessment to neuroimaging or genetic testing.
Yeah, so this is something. I mean, I don't think I have the time to go in very much detail, but I'll just give a brief overview. Wherein, see, always any child comes to you with a particular concern. Make sure you take a very detailed history. A history includes it has all domains. That is history of presenting illness, past history, family history, dietary history. Dietary history is very, very important when it comes to neurological, especially because a lot of nutritional disorders present or can present with development delays and other issues. And along with that, a detailed, see, this is history part. Next is a detailed physical examination. Look out for markers and clues where you can find which should, see, basically it is like a mathematics wherein 1 + 1 + 1 should give you the clinical condition where everything fits into it. You should try to, whatever the findings you have, whatever the history you have, sum it up in such a way that you can fit it out or narrow it down to 1-2 conditions, because that's usually how it is. They usually don't have like 1,000 things and then it is very difficult. It's not like that. They usually present like as a picture, one single disorder having multiple system involvement or multiple ways how they present. So that's why it's important to know what is the natural course of the disease, how do they progress, and what are the complications, what are the other systems involved, and that's when you can narrow it down and come to a differential diagnosis. So if you have to take, as I said, history is very important, and what age of presentation and when the first onset of symptoms have started. Most of them, when they present with developmental delay, that means it has started from birth itself. They were normal till particular age, and then most of them, like when they have global developmental delay, there are few specific conditions where they have isolated motor delay or isolated speech delay. In them, you have from birth either motor milestones or speech are also from the initial onset where they've attained the milestones. From then only it's delayed. And then you have to look at family history, whether there is any significant consanguinity or not, as well as when are there any other disorders that have been related in the family, other siblings with similar complaints, or early deaths in the family, or multiple abortions in the family. All these become very significant. It is a must to take a 3-degree pedigree charting or 3-generation pedigree charting. That is means like the current individual or child whom you're looking at, their parents, parents. So with complete their siblings, their children, how are they doing, any other significant neurological illness in the family, did they attain any delayed milestones from their end, are they having any other associated comorbidities or seizures, and along with this, the social history also is important. Mainly, so this is the set when it comes to history examination, all this. Next, you go to etiological. See, at the end of the day, when you know what has caused this particular cause, it's always easier to explain to the parents, as well as you know what you're looking at, as well as you know what treatment options lie at hand if there exist. So you have to work up towards the etiological diagnosis. That is important. Okay. To sum it up, what I've told, in history part, you look for recurrent miscarriages, birth defects, infant deaths, any global development delay or intellectual disabilities, or any other neurological conditions in the family, any other genetic conditions in the family, any consanguinity. And then also you look at how the parents treat the children, any there's any abuse, how is the education level of the parents, what is the employment status, and there is any neglect or involvement of any other conditions, as well as is there any involvement of child protective services somewhere in and around the management of the child. And then also coming to what are the antenatal scan findings, were there any abnormalities, was there any infection exposure or toxin exposure. Then coming to at birth, what was their weight, head circumference, what is the APGAR score, any birth significant history of hospital admissions or NICU stay, and any feeding difficulties following post-delivery, or any history of jaundice or hypoglycemic brain injury, or any seizures during that time, and as well as how are the developmental milestones, very much in detail should be taken. And then coming to physical examination, in physical examination, you look from always from head to toe, along with systemic involvement, wherein you look at the central nervous system in detail because you're dealing with the nervous system. Along with it, we should make sure that you look at other systems such as core abdomen, heart, respiratory system. So, and in general physical examination, you can have some clues to those particular conditions which cause neuroregression or development delay, such as coarse facies, light colored hair, pigmentation of the skin, or you can have neurocutaneous markers, or you can have eye findings such as cataract, cave ring, palsies, where they cannot move their eyes in the vertical direction or horizontal direction. Then in detailed ophthalmological examination, you can have cherry red spots or optic atrophy, and you look for dysmorphic features. And then, so this is how you like generally approach, and then you can put them under white matter disorders or gray matter disorders, or white and gray, or gray matter with organomegaly, without organomegaly. Then do they come under mitochondrial disorders or metabolic disorders? And you differentiate between everything and then come to an etiological diagnosis. The main part is work up towards the etiological diagnosis, where initially you do a baseline investigations, that is blood workup, along with specific workup for those specific conditions which you're suspecting, like an MRI or an EEG or both combined if the child is having seizures as well as developmental delay. Then you work up towards metabolic when you're suspecting a metabolic condition, especially you send the tandem mass spectroscopy, GCMS in terms of organic aciduities, and then you do ammonia lactate. And when all these give you clue to that particular suspicion, and then to confirm the same, you can do a genetic testing, wherein in genetics also you have to be very specific what you want to look for. And when you give your geneticists or the people who are analyzing the data or the gene data, when you give them your clinical suspicion is when they will look more into that. So you should be very particular and clear that I'm suspecting this and this in clinical history, so can you please look into these genes? And most of the times you end up having that there is positivity. Sometimes you have reports even where you cannot tell whether it's positive or negative. Then you'll have to work up further doing the parental Sanger testing. And it's not like every time you send only an whole exome sequencing. So sometimes if they're syndromic and particular syndromes, you just send karyotyping, and you can do even fish techniques, or you can have single gene, means you can check if you're very sure and clinically if it's a particular condition they are having a gene defect, you can check for that single gene defect instead of and wasting the money and think about it in a like that particular way. So that's how you approach. If you have time for it, I give you a case scenario, but I'm not sure whether we have the time for it. Yeah,
I think that's a wonderfully structured approach, doctor. So now finally, what clinical pearls or actionable advice would you offer to primary care physicians and pediatricians for ensuring timely referrals and optimizing early intervention?
See, first and foremost, my message to everyone out here, no matter whether they're pediatricians, whether they're general practitioners, whether they're parents, whether they're teachers, whether they're friends, brothers, family sisters, or family members, or anyone who is just observing you keenly, having a brief knowledge of or having an educated knowledge of what exactly is the milestone to be attained in that particular domain, like as I mentioned, gross motor, fine motor, social, emotional, language, and personal. So in this overview of these 4 domains, there are various milestones to be achieved in that particular domain. So we should have an idea of what is the upper maximum limit to which you can wait and watch. Beyond which it is not advisable to wait and watch. You have to approach or refer to a specialist doctor who would help in evaluation of the same as well as management of the same. So basically, as I have already given it in the previous, I think, one of the questions. So social smile by particular 2 age and 2 months, and then sitting independently by around 10 months, standing independently by around 1 year, able to walk independently by around 1.5 years of age. So these are some of the instead of going into nitty-gritty details where every lay person can understand. See, they can understand social smile or like interaction with the parents, they can understand neck control, they can understand sitting without support, standing without support, they can understand independent walking. At least these milestones, majority. And obviously, like when did they start initiation of bisyllables or monosyllables or single word phrases and 2 word phrases? This is a generalized overview. So at least this knowledge should be there so that we can, you should not do harm to a particular child who is coming to us. You should in fact do more than what is required so that we take a preventative measure as well as preventive steps to prevent the sequelae or prevent the damage that is going to happen because of the same. So, in short, to sum it up, the red flag signs would be something which everyone has to look out for. Basically, it is loss. See, any regression is always a definitive red flag sign. That's the most important red flag sign where early referral and early, referral to a specialist would help the parents and the children. So loss, that is nothing but what I mean by loss of developmental skills at any age. And even if there is any certain set of confusion or you're not very sure, it's always better to refer to a specialist. There is no harm in taking an extra opinion of knowing what exactly it is. And then any hearing loss at any age or persistently low tone or floppiness when they give birth to the children, they know how the children hold their limbs, hands and legs. So if they feel that the tone is less, in the sense like this is dropping off, and so you have to send or you have to refer. And there is no speech by 1.5 years and does not communicate and does not show even gestures, then that is one of the red flag signs. And if you find asymmetry of movements between right and left, or if you find that there's a preferential reach by only one particular side, so handedness comes by around 2 years of age. Anything less than, means like before 2, it is not like appropriate. But in Indian setting, it's very difficult to say because we tend to push the children and say everything you pick with right hand, everything you take with right hand. But early handedness or asymmetry of movements on both left and right is something which you should not let go and you should refer. And then persistent toe walking, any disabilities, any multi-system involvement, or the head size is small, that is less than -2 standard deviation. Actually, -3 is known as microcephaly, but if it's on the smaller side also, it's better to take a look at and review other things. And as well as the other milestones specifically, these are negative indicators which I would like to put it like. That is unable to sit unsupported by around 10 to 12 months and walk by around 1.5 to 2 years of age, and then run by around 2.5 years of age, and cannot point out to objects or show interest by around 2 years of age. So these are some of the red flags in terms of development, as well as the other things in terms of whatever history, like recurrent deaths in the family, recurrent similar type of illnesses in the family, or there is significant consanguinity or recurrent seizures, or there is any significant family history in terms of genetic disorders or metabolic disorders. It's always better to give an early referral to a specialist. So, and facial dysmorphism or any deficits or any for some reason you tend to do an imaging and the imaging is showing some abnormalities, better is to refer. And one takeaway what I would want to give to specialists, this is for general population. Now for the specialists who are seeing children, especially pediatricians and general practitioners, there's something known as developmental assessment where everyone will be familiar with. So it is good to do a developmental assessment. It is a screening as well as a surveillance. And when you find that you're not having up to mark in the developmental assessment, it's always best to refer early than wait and watch and reassure it saying that everything is okay, or they will pick it up in a short span of time. So you should utilize every well baby visit to do this developmental assessment, especially when they come for vaccination, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 6 months, 7 months if you take private setup, but if you take government setup, it's 9 months and 1 year. Utilize this well baby visits to developmentally assess the children whether they're appropriate for their age, whether there is any lag, whether you find something abnormalities, some deformities, some facial dysmorphism, or some tone abnormalities, then immediately it's better to refer. When in doubt, always better to refer. So to call it off or to end it, I would say early diagnosis makes a lot of difference, especially starting from the antenatal period. And to give a wonderful example where we have reached to the current date, there is antenatal diagnosis as well as antenatal treatment and gene therapy antenatally for spinal muscular atrophy. And so the earlier you start, the better prognosis, the lesser sequelae, the better outcomes you can give to your patients. So at the end of the day, be watchful, be aware of what is what, and this is something which I would give as a takeaway message.
Yes. So, Dr. Loretta, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this topic. And I think early intervention is something that everybody should look out for. And these red flags are really interesting to know and grasp for patients as well as their parents also. Uh, and as we wrap up today's session, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this topic. And this conversation has actually truly shed light on how critical it is to catch the subtle signs before they turn serious. So, thank you so much for sharing those.
Yeah, always. Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning into this episode. And remember, if you're a healthcare professional who is eager to delve deeper into medical topics or have questions, do not hesitate to join us on the Medicine Apps platform. Medicine Apps platform is not just a resource, it's a dynamic space where you can connect with your medical peers, participate in meaningful discussions, and contribute to the ongoing evolution of healthcare. So until next time, stay aware and take care.